All right, welcome back everybody. Sorry to keep everybody waiting, but we had a few things to do before we broke for lunch, and now we're back and we're due to hear from Diamond Creek Farm Limited, please. Who are on mute, I think. Here we go. Just when you're ready, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. So this is the presentation for Diamond Creek Farms Limited. I have with me over here to my left, Glen and Abby Neems. Bevan Holbrook next door, who will be giving planning evidence. Dave Mansur, who's giving evidence on landscape, and Judith Nathanson on the traffic effects. We've lodged legal submissions, and you will have read those, and I'm not proposing to read through those. I'm guessing that you will have been hearing similar things from various counsel, and I don't think that there's any disagreement as to the legal framework that applies. So I've prepared some speaking notes, and I'm going to address those and then let the witnesses deal with questions that you might have.
All right, thank you.
So just as a brief sort of overview, Diamond Creek Farms, it's submitter 387, and their proposal is to rezone approximately 43 hectares of their 252 hectare property, which is on the north of State Highway 23. And the proposal, their original submission, was to rezone to country living zone, and that's the proposal that's supported by the expert witnesses. It lies almost adjoining, but very close to the Tiuku village, which has a primary school, a coffee shop, a church, and a community hall. And it's a little rural community node, and it's close to Raglan. So this whole district plan rezoning process has actually been quite odd from a submitter applicant type perspective, in that we've been unable to engage directly with council officers or with the planners who are reporting. And originally we had some quite constructive discussion with Ms. Overwater while she was with council, and we had a couple of meetings with her and kept her in the loop, and we were developing a structure plan so that when the proposal came to the panel, you actually had a proper structure plan and you had a section 32 analysis, because we were very aware that the submitters surveyor had assisted them to put in the submission to the district plan process, but it wasn't at that point supported by any expert input. But since Ms. Overwater, in one of those discussions with her, she suggested, had we considered looking at a village zoning for it, because that seemed to be sort of the direction that council was going in. So at that point, we then, having done an initial structure plan based on a country living zone layout, then asked Mr. Mansur to adapt and see if he could come up with a village zoning proposal, and whether he could support that, because he'd also undertaken a visual assessment. And Ms. Makinson looked at whether village zone could be supported. And then when we got the framework report and we tried to engage again with the planners at that stage, the advice was really to try and find how your proposal best fits with the framework report, and put your best foot forward. And when we looked at it and talked with Glen and Abby, really that was the point where we decided that actually this is most appropriately a country living zone development, because realistically it's going to be unlikely to have reticulated infrastructure, and it is surrounded by a rural area, and it's supporting a small rural village, and it's never going to become a town. And while Mr. Mansur could support it in a village zone development, I think that all of the experts are probably more comfortable where it's landed as a proposed country living zone development. In terms of the investment to this, Glen and Abby have invested a lot of their own, funds, obviously, but a lot of emotional and personal commitment into this. It makes sense for their farming entity, because physically trying to deal with part of your farm that's across the state highway is awkward, and it's not the best of their land, and it's sloping down towards a creek, but also because it makes sense as a subdivision proposal. There's not really terribly much rural residential near Raglan, and it's a product that's being sought. They've done the right thing. They've taken advice. They've worked towards the structure plan, got proper consultants involved, and got really good solid advice at every step. In terms of the statutory framework, in my submission, the NPSUD is indirectly relevant to this. It's certainly not directly relevant, because it's not really contemplating development on rural residential land. It's talking about urban environments. In my submission, it is indirectly relevant though, because the purchasers of rural residential land in the main are not first homeowners, and so the fact that they're moving there is of itself going to release other housing down the chain for those that can get in. National planning standards are not really relevant, except that there's likely to be a name change in the definition. The regional policy statement, in my submission, this fits with far more of the regional policy statement objectives and policies than it doesn't, and the ones that it doesn't, it still isn't contrary to them. It can fit. I just really struggle with the approach of the planners, which seems to be that if this is not contemplated, if it's not contemplated as being within an area of development contemplated and future-proof, therefore it's wrong and it's contrary to future-proof. And Mr. Holbrook's evidence goes through the future-proof provisions and what's in the RPS there, and identifies that that is not what it's saying. And in my view, it is imprudent for the district not to provide for residential support around its small villages, particularly where there are still functioning schools and functioning elements. Waipa is also within the future-proof area, and they've taken quite a different approach to looking at provision of residential and rural residential land in the district. And Future Proof has not stopped them, stopped Waipa identifying areas of future large lot, they call it large lot residential, either in the immediate or deferred timeframes. They don't seem to have found the same excuse in the RPS or in Future Proof. And in my submission, that's because the excuse really isn't there. We disagree with the Section 42A report recommendations, and we instead rely on the expert assessment of criteria that's summarised in the Colonial Vineyards decision. There is a place for planned and appropriate rural residential development in this district, and the Diamond Creek Farms proposal will support an existing village by concentrating appropriate residential development on land that is difficult to integrate into the larger farm, and is a better option for those seeking a rural lifestyle than allowing ad hoc and scattered subdivision throughout the rural zone. This is a proposal that not only supports an existing village, it creates a new connection to a state highway that is not opposed by Waka Kotahi. How often does that happen? WK has been kept in the loop at all stages of planning the structure plan and has gone so far as to provide the statement confirming its no opposition. That is because the proposal can and will work. And I take my hat off to Ms. Mackinson for this, but actually, to be fair to WK, right from the start, they have been very willing to engage and have been open in providing feedback on all of the structure plan iterations and looking at what the road locations and they wanted to know about the stormwater management and whether that might affect where the flow was, to make sure there were going to be no effects on culverts and the state highway and so forth, and have been extremely positive. And to actually provide a letter that effectively supports it subject to agreed conditions is, in my view, a constructive and reasonable position for them to adopt. In terms of submissions and support and or opposition, the Regional Council and Mercury New Zealand have opposed the rezoning. There's nothing specific in the Regional Council evidence filed by Ms. Foley in respect of the DCF submission beyond reference in attachment 2, which lists their further submissions. Their statement of evidence retains broad opposition to all rezoning requests that seek rezoning from rural to country living in areas outside of those identified within Future Proof for urban expansion. We note that neither HCC, Hamilton City Council, nor NZTA has opposed the rezoning on Future Proof or any other grounds, and Future Proof itself didn't make a submission in respect of a further submission on this proposal. The Regional Council's not opposed the rezoning on the basis of loss of productive soils. In our submission, in my submission, the Regional Council should be most concerned by the lack of planning for rural residential development in the district as part of the proposed plan, which instead allows for haphazard creation of 8,000 square metre lots wherever there are lower quality soils and older titles. Mr. Holbrook's rebuttal evidence references the RPS explanation to policy 14.2, which specifically notes that neither the policy, which prioritises productive use of high-class soils, nor its methods are intended to prevent all urban development. Rather, the aim is for planned growth as part of district plan reviews, so that development is the subject of a comprehensive planning process. And that's the approach that's been adopted by DCF, but which in our submission is missing from the proposed plan as notified. The Regional Council also opposes submissions that propose introducing transferable development rights into the proposed plan. And I note that opposition points to a blanket opposition to any form of increased rural residential development in the district, and blindness to the fragmentation that can occur with rules as exist at present. The Regional Council can't ignore the predicted growth figures for the region, or the fact that people do and will continue to want opportunities for rural lifestyle living within commuting distances from their workplaces. And in our submission, it's better to plan for that rather than allowing it to happen randomly. We note policy 6.17.3 of the RPS, which directs both Waipa and Waikato District Council to investigate and consider adopting provisions such as transferable development rights to allow development to be directed to rural residential zones identified in district plans. The explanation notes the need to plan for rural residential growth in the future-proof area because of the impacts on infrastructure. And in this case, Waka Kotahi sees no adverse impact on the roading infrastructure, and the development can deal with its own 3 waters requirements. What that policy does contemplate is that there will be planned zoning within the future-proof areas, and that planned zoning for rural residential. The Mercury further submission of what is one of 400.
We don't need to talk about the Mercury further submission, thanks.
They haven't filed any evidence in relation to this one. Sharp Planning Solutions has requested an area be rezoned to village, and Diamond Creek Farms considers that Tiuku is more appropriate for rural residential lifestyle given the character of the existing environment, and Sharp's not made a further submission in respect. Ms. van der Voorden's submission is also looking for further residential development in and around the village. There have been no local submissions or further submissions opposing the proposal, which is now widely known in the locality because of the consultation that Mr. and Mrs. Neems have been undertaking. And that consultation, which they can give you more detail about, has also included the school community and the local iwi community. So I think I'll leave my comments there. And unless there's anything you want me to comment on now.
No, I don't think there is. Let's do like we've been doing all day. We'll hear the evidence and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Glen and Abby Neems. I think Glen's going to answer any questions you might have, but they might want to say something about the consultation process. Go for it.
G'day, how are you?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years going through, getting to this period of time. Early on, it was, as Joan said, was quite smooth sailing until we were put on the village zone journey, which caused a bit of to and fro for everybody involved. But as we think a country living zone suits the environment, we've always pictured it to be a perfect place for it. There's big demand for large lot residential over in our area towards Raglan, around the Tiuku, Waitatuna area. At this stage, there is no planning for that. It is all smaller residential, 800 metres, 600 metre lots. Yeah, so any questions really?
Well, as I say, let's hear from your witnesses, and then we'll round them up, I think, and ask them as a package.
Well, Glen and Abby have put in a statement of evidence.
Yeah,
so
we've read that. As I said at the outset, we've read that. So the opportunity's there for them to speak to it.
Well, that was Glen.
No, I know it was. We've read it. I'm just saying, unless he's got something else to say to us, we'll question him and the others when we've heard from everybody else, like we've been doing all day.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. They call Mr. Dave Mansur.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Some presentation points, I believe they've been distributed.
Yes, they have. Thank you.
So I just propose to go through those quickly.
Thank you.
Before launching into that, just so we've been involved in the development of the design strategy to help integrate this site for what Glen and Abby want to do in terms of country living from the offset, and that is sort of taken into consideration the existing characteristics in and around the site and its surrounding landscape. So a landscape suitability analysis with analysis factors weighted in favour of the preservation of wider landscape character and aesthetic values indicates that the proposed zone change area is well suited to the level of intensification and development that could occur under the proposed country living zone. This is because the site does not contain any significant native vegetation or have any protected overlays on it. It is not within or next to an outstanding natural feature or landscape or in an area of outstanding natural character. It is proximate to Tiuku village, an existing node of development already serviced by a school, community hall, church and store, and by consolidating and intensifying development around the existing nodes such as Tiuku, wider rural character and amenity is maintained and rural sprawl is avoided. The nature of the topography within the site minimises earthworks requirements, meaning the formative processes which form the landscape in the first instance can be generally maintained. The proposed structure plan, and so that's contained in my graphic attachment, will maintain and enhance key landscape and ecological features within the zone change area, namely the gullies, wetlands, streams that run through the proposed zone. Will reinforce the existing Tiuku village core as the heart of a rural village. Will create a safe and sociable rural village neighbourhood. Provide a variety of lot sizes that reinforce high densities towards the core of the village. Provide pedestrian and cycle links between different parts of the zone and the wider landscape, and allow for future expansion, connectivity, and future rezoning of adjacent land. And so I'm talking about the land immediately to the north of the school in this instance. While rezoning would change the rural characteristics of the area with adverse effects associated with the loss of rural character and amenity, partially offset by the positive effects associated with riparian restoration and gully wetland enhancement works identified in the proposed structure plan. The site is contained within a relatively small visual catchment, meaning that character change within the proposed zone will not affect the wider rural landscape. The effect on visual amenity will range between having no effect to moderate adverse effect when considered against the baseline of the rural zone. Landscape and amenity outcomes for country liver zone differ slightly in that they seek to enhance landscape amenity and maintain open views to the rural zone. And from a landscape character and visual amenity perspective, the application site is suited to the proposed country living zone. With careful design, the site would also be capable of supporting high levels of development enabled by the village zone. But such densities would only result in a small increase in the overall effect on landscape character and visual amenity. So I'll leave it at that.
Is there anything in terms of your graphic attachment to your primary evidence that you want to refer us to specifically?
Well, if
I've got it on my screen if you want me to put it, if you want me to share it, if that's of
Okay.
any assistance.
If I can take you firstly to page 4, which is development density. map.
Just one moment, I've just got to get, looks like I've been shut out. Someone needs to enable me, or whatever the right term is, please.
You should have access now.
Thank you. So sorry, Mr. Mansell, which one was that?
Page 4, the next page.
That one, yeah.
And I think this is important to understand because it shows the spatial relationship between the various villages and nodes of development between Raglan on the left-hand side of the screen and moving back towards the Hamilton end on the right, with the site dead centre. And you can see that the proposed plan change area is associated to an existing node of development. So by reinforcing development in this area, it helps effectively maintain the status quo in terms of where the villages are and how they relate to each other. And as I said before, helps to avoid urban sprawl. If we flick to the next page, page 5.
Sorry, it's just why is that not going down? Just bear with me. Here we go.
This is the proposed structure plan area, which sort of shows the general configuration of roading networks, which minimise the effects into the gullies by with minimum crossing points or going around the heads where possible. The green areas indicate areas that would be in reserve and replanted effectively with gully restoration, and the various blue dots indicate pedestrian and cycle linkages. And what that might look like will be on the following page, which is page 6, which just gives an indication of how a subdivision may be configured for a country living development. The aim is to have larger lots in the northern and eastern end of the site in the lower lying lands, and intensifying slightly as one moves towards the centre of the existing village. Following two plans show how intensification would have occurred under a village zone. And at this point, we get into some images taken from a computer-generated model that show what that effect may look like. In my evidence in chief, there should be a link to the model itself, which you're able to look at in 3D and move around.
I'll just
photos of the site
Yep.
context, where it is.
I'm just flicking through. You tell me if I've gone too far or when you want me to stop.
This is the visual so if we just go, this is the visual catchment, so that the area is basically in red to green of the areas where it's possible to see this site. This is generally quite a small catchment for the intensity of development that would occur. And this is why I was able to support either country living through to village. These are the view location points represented by the various photos. These are the photos taken from each view location point.
I'll just flick through these as we go, rather than dwelling on them for any length of time.
So really what they're just showing is the generally sort of existing rural characteristics of the site and the containing hill country.
Very good. All right, thank you, Mr. Mansell. Let's just see if there are, I think on this particular topic, let's just see if there are any questions of you. and we'll do a wrap up on anything of a more general nature after we've heard from the other two witnesses. Because I think once we've heard the planning evidence, some of the other matters might be more crystallised. Let's see if there are any questions for you. Ms. Sedgwick?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is specifically for Mr. Mansard, but it's a comment that was made by Heather Thompson about, in your evidence, or somebody's evidence, about the concern over the proliferation of septic tanks and the possibility of runoff into the harbour, I think through the Matakotia stream. Could you comment, or could somebody please comment on that?
You want to talk about
That's probably,
Well, yes, she did say that wasn't our evidence. She did, that was her one concern about country living. My understanding of the process is that when we went to resource consent, we would aim to mitigate that as much as possible. And the older septic tanks are the ones that are causing issues.
During the design process, we've ensured that there is sufficient area for field dispersal, etc., and through modern design.
So I'm imagining that the Tiuku school and village are also on septic tanks and are in a similar or very close by area. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, Tiuku School's dispersal field is on their school field.
Okay, no, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Gibb?
No, not really any questions. I note there's a lot of supporting paperwork from neighbours, the school itself and the surrounding people. So I did note that along with the local councillor, and Heather Thompson also suggests there's the opportunity for mitigation with planting. So I do see there's been a lot of work go into this in consultation at this point with iwi as well. The only thought I had was, and it's nothing really to do with the planning, the comment about the awkwardness of the state highway to run a farm. Many farms use underpasses to connect pieces of land. So yeah, I just thought that was a obvious opportunity, but it isn't really what you're aiming to do. So yeah, I don't really have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Fulton?
No, I have no questions at this stage.
Mr. Marg?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Mr. Kearney?
No, thanks.
No, and I don't have any questions either. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Makinson?
Good afternoon. I just wanted to make a couple of very brief points. First of all, the transportation assessment that I supervised looked at the 200 lot village zoning potential and as a worst case. So that was the basis on which all the consultation with Wakakatahi NZTA was undertaken, and the larger development was the basis on which they provided their not opposed letter to us. So that gives me a lot of comfort that for a smaller village zone that could potentially deliver maybe 50 to 80 houses, you're looking at approximately half the traffic effect that would otherwise occur with a more intense zoning. And on that basis, you know, if Wakakatahi is happy with 200 houses, then 50 to 80 is clearly a lot better situation. The other thing I'd just very like to quickly address is in relation to a couple of comments made in the Section 42A report, one of which was around the lack of identification of bus routes and bus stops within the sort of broad structure plan layout that's been provided. In my experience, it is not appropriate to identify bus routes and stops at this stage. If you look at the current Hamilton City Council Peacock Structure Plan process, which is a significantly larger area of land, what Council is looking at there is they are identifying the major public transport routes and the public transport hubs where you would expect to have interchange and significant numbers of bus services running, they're not looking at the individual service route and stop location. So I disagree with the comment that should have been provided. And my final point is I'd just like to underline the degree of connectivity that this site has, not only to the village, and I think Mr. Manser's visual, page 5, that we've just seen, identified it really, really well. Glen Abbey are looking at not only providing walking and cycling routes within their site, they're looking at providing off-site opportunities as well for leisure. You know, they're looking at providing it through their own farm on the south side of State Highway. They're providing connections to the school and the community hall and the church and the shop. You know, and whilst there may be a marginal physical separation between their land and the actual village zone of Teuku, in terms of the physical environment, I just don't believe that separation will exist. I'd also like to underline the fact that the Raglan bus service goes straight past the site now. That service is very much geared up to support commuter and school-based connection between Raglan and Hamilton. It has bike racks on the front, so it supports multimodal transportation options. It also runs off-peak to support more general shopping and access to goods and services. And in my experience, there are very few other villages that I would say are as well connected and that have the opportunity to really give effect to the government policy statement on land transport, which is very much focusing on safety, network resilience, but also multimodal accessibility and climate change. And that's all I have to say this afternoon, unless you have any questions.
Thank you very much. I think we'll press on and hear from Mr. Holbrook, and then we'll see if we've got any questions of a general nature and around the plan proposals.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Holbrook.
Mr. Bell able to pop my presentation up? Great. Thank you. Probably the next slide. So that's the site in question. I think that's been covered well.
Yeah, I don't think we need to dwell on that. Thanks.
No, excellent. And the next one.
Or that.
Or that. Great. And I think the summary of the proposal is pretty well known to you as well.
Yep. Or that.
Yep. All good. So I'm going to cover off sort of 4 main areas of contention that lie between my evidence and what was produced in the section 42A report. So the first topic relates to village limits, and this seems to be pretty fundamental to the reason why the section 42A report has recommended that the rezoning does not go ahead, and that was highlighted yesterday by the reporting planner again. So the first comment I make in respect of that is that Future Proof does not identify any urban or village limit for Teuku or any other village limit outside of the Hamilton periphery. So the section 42A report asserts that the intention of Future Proof is for growth to only be directed to those areas with urban and village limits, either wholly or within the periphery. I disagree in respect of villages. Village limits were only identified on the Hamilton periphery where a more stringent framework for managing growth was required. It is not the intention of Future Proof to strictly limit the growth of rural villages and nodes outside of the Hamilton periphery. And the example I use, in which Dr. Forrick referenced already, was Waipa district. None of those villages in the Waipa district have urban or village limits identified in Future Proof. Yet Waipa have progressed to Plan Change 5 to allow for rural residential development of their villages. The last point I make in respect of village limits is that Future Proof itself refers to section, or has a section 7.5, which sets out that the maps representing the settlement pattern provide a general indication of extent of urban areas. And it's worth taking a look at section 7.5, and I've copied it into paragraph 6 of my rebuttal, and it also reinforces that when councils or TLAs are considering proposals, new proposals for zoning, that it's critical that the guiding principles that underline the settlement pattern of Future Proof are not compromised. So it's telling us that there is the ability to consider proposals outside of the village limits that had been indicated in it. The next topic where there's some contention between myself and the 42A report relates to high class soils and fragmentation. So in this respect, the Diamond Creek farm site, or the area that we're looking at rezoning, contains both versatile or high quality soils and non-high quality soils. And the split there is approximately 37% high quality and 63% non-high quality. There was an agricultural report presented with the evidence, and that report concludes that modest changes could be made to the farming practices across the wider farm to see that the rezoning would result in the net loss of animals down to approximately 60 animals as a result. In terms of the policy of the regional policy statement, that was referenced yesterday by the reporting planner, and she spoke about the need to avoid a decline in the availability of high class soils for primary production. And the piece that I'd like to highlight there is due to inappropriate subdivision use or development. It is not the intention of policy 14.2 to prevent all urban development on high class soil. However, it is expected that in order to ensure development is appropriate, it should be subject to a comprehensive planning process, such as a district plan review, obviously which we're going through now, a structure plan, which we've provided, or a growth strategy prior to that rezoning. Information provided with the submission has been comprehensive and concludes that the loss of high quality soil is not significant. Tiuku is an existing settlement and is therefore, and I stress, an appropriate location for the country living zone. And again, it's worthwhile having a look at that policy 14.2, and it's referenced in paragraph 13 of my rebuttal. The third area which I like to discuss is in regards to the availability of services. So the section 42A report states that the framework report and the regional policy statement and MPS on UD sets out a preference for urban growth to be accommodated in locations where it is possible to be serviced by council-held reticulated networks. My view is that the Waikato proposed district plan has appropriately responded to that and by and large has directed urban growth to towns and villages. This, however, does not mean that there is not a legitimate role for the country living zone in appropriate locations. There is demand for rural residential living, and it is the role for the proposed plan to manage this and ensure that it occurs at an appropriate scale and at appropriate locations. And finally, the area that is under contention relates to the Schedule 6 of the regional policy statement. And you'll be familiar with this, and this sets out a number of development principles that you consider when you're proposing new development or zoning. The first set there are the general development schedules, development principles in Schedule 6, and I'll just quickly run through those. The first one, A, as I've already covered, that Tiuku doesn't have a village limit. However, that's because it's not located on the Hamilton periphery. B, the objectives and policies and rules will ensure that there is a clear delineation between the rural zone and the country living zone. The anticipated outcomes for these zones are very different. C, the proposed district plan provides opportunities for urban intensification and development. It is not the intention of this clause to foreclose all greenfield development in lieu of enabling only infill opportunities. I, the Diamond Creek farm site will promote a compact form, albeit at a density which is consistent with the country living zone. The structure plan which you've seen shows a well-planned community with walkways, cycleways, and as Ms. Makinson has pointed out, can utilise a public bus service. Finally, in respect of the rural residential development principles, the ones in contention are E, Diamond Creek Farms will connect with existing infrastructure, including State Highway 23, the public bus, and it can also utilise existing social infrastructure, that's at Te Uku, including the school, the store, the community hall, the church. And in respect of points C and F, I believe those have already been covered by Mr. Manser. The zone change will enable development which would have no effect to moderate effect on the key attributes of the surrounding landscape. Consolidation and intensifying existing nodes assist with avoiding uncontrolled and inappropriate subdivision. And that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Holbrook. Let's see if the panel have any questions of you or the wider team. And I think other than the landscape questions, which were quite confined in terms of that topic, we'll leave it for you folk to determine who's best to answer any questions unless we direct them specifically at one individual. So let's start with you, Mr. Marg.
Look, thanks for the evidence. I think it's very comprehensive, but I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
No, I have no questions either. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb.
A very clear presentation. Thank you. No questions.
Ms. Sedgwick.
No, none for me either. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney.
No, thanks.
No, and I don't have any questions either. Thank you. Thank you very much for the comprehensive information you've provided. And we'll have some deliberations to do in due course on what we've heard. But thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
We will just reorganise ourselves for the Horatu.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
All right. Thank you and welcome. Just when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. This presentation is on behalf of Horatu Properties Limited, submitter 397. I have with me Mr. Robert Simpson on behalf of Horatu Properties, and also Tracy Morse, who's provided the planning evidence. Again, I've just wanted to make some very brief comments to the proposal. This is a 7.5 hectare property that is completely surrounded by physical features. It's got roads on 3 sides and the river on the 4th. And it has the potential for 13 lots at 5,000 square metres per lot as part of a rural residential development. The original request was to rezone from rural to either country living or village, and again that was trying to work out what was going to be the best fit with where the district plan was going to go, and I think in light of, first of all, the framework report, but also the evidence and support. The submitter has accepted that a country living zone zoning would be most appropriate, but is hoping that the panel is going to fall on the side of reducing that lot size down in light of quite a number of submissions to that effect. The statutory flat framework is the same as applies for all of these rezoning applications. Again, the NPS urban development may have some indirect effect in that you're again releasing an opportunity for housing elsewhere by releasing some rural residential land. The regional policy statement, Ms. Morse's evidence goes through the objectives and policies in the RPS relevant to the Horatu Property Limited proposal. And really, this proposal is about achieving a practical outcome. You've got a piece of land that's really too small to be rural. It hasn't got too small because of anything that the owners have done. When the owners purchased it, they kind of had to purchase it as part of a larger block, and it was already small at that stage. And when the expressway went through the larger farm, and they sold the larger component back to the NZTA, they were left with this small block which really has no practical or even actual rural development, rural production potential. In our submission, country living zone zoning on this won't compromise future-proof or any of the intent and controls in the RPS. The site's still close to a village without compromising the village itself. It's close enough to be able to support the school. It's close to existing businesses and industries within the district. So we're not even talking about here the owners necessarily working in Hamilton. There's now a big employment node at Horatu, which is within Waikato district, and it offers a residential environment for workers that want that location. The road frontages themselves are relevant to the security issues that were raised in Ms. Simpson's evidence, and that's some of the reasons why the rural use is difficult. But on the other hand, those roads provide good access and transportation opportunities. In our submission, 13 additional lots here is likely to be within the growth expectations for Horatu Village, and it's not going to be inconsistent with policy 6.14. The table 6.1 in the in future proof allocates growth for Waikato rural villages at between 2006 and 2061, increasing from 6,725 residents in 2006 to 15,775 in 2061. And the table predicts that there'd be 9,050 residents in 2021. Now, I've trawled through the evidence. I tried to find where someone's saying what the actual population is now, given this is 2021. So, and I wasn't able to find that, I'm sorry. But I'd be pretty surprised if these 13 additional residences would do too much damage to that kind of projected population growth that's in there. We don't accept that future proof intends no residential development in the district for the reasons I've already said previously today. Ms. Bolton's Section 42A report has recommended that the submission be rejected and rural zones retained. And that's made on the basis that the site's not located within an indicative urban or village limit identified in future proof and the current RPS urban limits. And the growth area identified in Waikato 2070, and we disagree with that, those conclusions. We disagree with the reasons as set out in Ms. Morse's evidence, and for the reason that it's not contemplated by future proof. Waka Kotahi, again, was originally opposed, and now having read the evidence is neutral towards the proposal in light of evidence filed by the submitter, the small scale and the reduced potential for transportation adverse effects. There's nothing specific in Ms. Foley's evidence for the Regional Council except in relation to future proof, and this is a site that's referred to in attachment 2 to her evidence. But it's not clear as to what specifically the issue is. Hamilton City Council has maintained its opposition to the establishment of any additional country living within the Hamilton area of interest, particularly in the Hamilton urban expansion area. And in respect of this, the HPL submission, the only references within table 2 of that evidence, and the table incorrectly identifies the HPL site as being located within Hamilton's area of interest. So if the concern is about development within Hamilton's area of interest, this site isn't within that area. So we wonder whether that submission is based on an incorrect interpretation of where the site is in the plan, which, to be fair, the plans are quite hard to read. I think Ms. Morse found that when she drilled down into them. Ms. Morse has identified the area of interest from the Gazette notice and has a maps for that for the hearing. In conclusion, HPL seeks that the site at Horatu is rezoned from rural to country living, and Mr. Simpson is available to answer any questions that you may have. His daughter is on very recent maternity leave, and but he's got a long history with the site and can answer any factual questions that the panel might have, and Ms. Morse can speak to her planning evidence.
That's fine. Let's hear from Ms. Morse, unless Mr. Simpson wants to say anything. I don't think we've need him to read his evidence. It's helpful background. We have seen most of it before, I'd also note. So if Mr. Simpson does want to address us, that's fine, but he's under no compulsion to do so. And we'll leave it to you to decide whether we go straight to Ms. Morse or not.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
All right, thanks very much, Mr. Simpson. So let's pass it over to you, Ms. Morse. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So the site at 11 to 27 Sullivan Road, as Dr. Forrett has mentioned, is bounded on 3 boundaries by roads and has 3 private residential properties between it and the Waikato River. So it's quite firmly.
Can we show up a photo plan of it?
Just turn. We can use that one with the
Yeah, that one.
with the overlays turned off.
That's not me, that's Richard. Yeah. And I think
There's a satellite. There's a satellite option there somewhere.
Yeah, that's it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and the Tiawa Lakes cycleway is along. Oh, Tiawa, sorry, not Tiawa Lake, sorry. I've been looking at a few things lately and getting muddy in my brain. The Tiawa cycleway, sorry, is located along adjoining the river there. Yeah. So the site is quite nicely physically separated from other properties in terms of prevention of creep or allowing for further future spillage. Oh, spillage is the wrong word, sorry. So it's quite nicely encapsulated in terms of its unique zoning request, and is it's able to accommodate on-site provision of 3 waters with accommodation of minimum 5,000 square metre section lots as outlined under the country living zone. So it's providing its own infrastructure in terms of, and not putting in any undue pressure on council infrastructure. The soils the development won't represent a loss of productive soils, as the site has been subject to historic sand mining activities, which has seriously degraded the quality of the soils, as outlined in the report prepared by AgFirst that was included with our evidence in chief. And as Dr. Forrett had mentioned, it's close to a number of local employment opportunities with its proximity to Horatu village across the river. The plan included on the concept plan page of the evidence highlights package shows an indicative layout of approximately 13 lots around the existing pond that has basically arisen from finding a spring on the site. And so it's a good indication of what could occur on the site were the zoning to become country living, with multiple opportunities for different accesses of not just River Road, but Horatu Bridge or Sullivan Road, to avoid having extensive transportation impacts on any of the roads. We haven't had specific transportation assessment, but we have informally discussed it with Mrs. Mackinson on this matter, and so the opportunity for providing an appropriate access arrangement is definitely able to be accommodated on the site. As Dr. Forrett mentioned, NZTA Waka Kotahi have altered their position on the proposal to neutral based on the low volume of lots proposed and potential transportation impacts on their adjacent expressway. And in summary, in closing, I think the proposed rezoning represents an appropriate, achieves positive environmental, social and economic outcomes for the landowners and community, and is consistent with the outcomes sought under the RPS and future proof, as well as the district plan itself, while not being consistent with rural, because it's just the rural zone in itself does not anticipate any form of development of this nature.
All right, thank you, Ms. Morse. Let's see if there's any questions for any of the team. Let's start with you, Ms. Gibb.
Yes, thank you. I'm familiar with the property, and just one thing, I'm also familiar with the traffic build-up in Horatu Bridge Road as it heads towards River Road at the usual busy times, end of work, school times and start of work. So if it does go ahead, I would think you'd need to do a little bit more work on the traffic assessment. I don't think it's appropriate for more entries off Horatu Bridge Road. But it does seem to fit with the country living zone across the road from there. So I don't really have any questions, but I do understand all your points. Thanks very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yes, thank you. Just a question. I think I got it right, but the H21 area stops at the Ngāwahia bypass, doesn't it? It never went to Lake Road. Is that right?
No. Yeah,
So
that's
it's not
correct.
part. Yes, it's never been considered part of that.
No.
Okay, and access to the property will come off Sullivan Road. I presume that was the. It didn't show it, but I presume that's where it would come from, would it?
On the concept plan, it's available from probably a mix of the three, or two, probably predominantly River Road and Sullivan Road. So with maybe a shared access off River Road to avoid having multiple accesses onto River Road, as well as those that front onto Sullivan Road. So yeah, that plan, it's indicative. It's not, because this was based on when they were originally considering village or country living. So the lot sizes are not, and positions are not precise, because they're based on sort of something in between country living and village zone, but it's gives a good indication of lot configuration and access.
Good.
There is already an
The
access
pond that is on it, I presume it drains into the Waikato River at some form, does it?
Yes, there's a pipe out the bottom of the pond, and that runs right through to the river. Yes.
It's piped what from there to there through the next section? Or is it
Yes, there's an easement through the next title, and it goes down into a. If you see those trees in the very bottom left-hand corner, there's a pipe.
Yes.
Pipe runs from the bottom of the pond through to the top of those trees, and then there's like a drain runs down beside those trees and then into the river.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, I think I'll finish there. Thank you. Yes.
Just
Sorry,
one
you have
question.
finished or you haven't? Sorry.
Yes, I have. Yes.
Sorry, my apologies. Mr.
right.
Mark?
Just the relationship to the neighbours. Are you able to identify what they're all currently zoned at?
So to the east and north, it's rural.
Right.
And the development within Purity Lane is country living. So that's pretty, so we're rural. The properties to the southwest are rural, and Purity Lane is a little enclave of country living. So we would seek to be comparable to Purity Lane in terms of zoning and
Yes.
that nature,
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Sedgwick.
Thank you. No, I have no questions.
Mr. Cooney?
Can you flick that back up again, that map? The property down below you there, that person we heard from yesterday, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mr. Fulcher.
Yeah. And the one next door to that and the other one, are they seeking country living?
Not that we're aware of, no.
Okay. You haven't jumped the fence to talk to them at all?
Well, I was explaining to Dr. Forrett earlier on that that person who made application to put another title into his block has only been able to do that quite recently because there was a setback line from the Perry Sand excavations that basically meant that you could only get one building site on that site. And I presume that it's changed with the Perry development so that perhaps that restriction doesn't apply. But in terms of the other two people, one is Mark Thorburn, the very first one from Huntley, and he's a builder, and he definitely wanted to keep all of his land. And the other one in the middle is Sarah Coombs, who was on my case for about 5 years before she got it, so I can't see she'd be wanting to cut it up.
Yep, okay. All right, thank you.
And I don't have any questions either, thank you. That's all pretty clear. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon and the information you've provided to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're a little bit ahead of schedule. We're quite a long way ahead of schedule. So I understand that Mr. Bell's been in touch with a couple of submitters, and we're ready to now carry on with Ms. Huaki. Ms. Huaki, I have it on good authority that you haven't done this before and that you might be a little bit trepidatious about what might happen. Please don't be. All we would ask you to do is to tell us what it is you're seeking and why. If we don't have any, if we have any queries about what you're saying or don't understand it, we'll ask. But it looks like you're ensconced somewhere in, possibly in your house. Just imagine that we're sort of sitting on the couch across the way from you having a chat. So there's nothing to be nervous about. We're not going to bite your head off or ask you any pointed questions.
That's okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you. Although there's a lot of noise in the background, a lot of feedback noise.
Yeah, I've just been trying to. I wasn't quite ready. So
that's better. Whatever you did there has made a big difference. I don't know what you did, but well, now it's back again. Whatever you just did there.
Okay, you're coming through my thing, so I can barely hear you, but I'll try my best.
All right. So you've got about 10 minutes to tell us what it is the problem is. We have read your submission, so stick to what the problem is and what you want us to do about it would be great, please.
Yeah. So the problem for me is around the zoning of the request for Tiny Creek Holdings to rezone the rural property around my home to industrial. So I'm situated at 495 Ruakura Road, which is directly opposite the current roadworks. I'm not sure if you've got the maps in front of you, but it's directly across from the roadworks that are happening in Ruakura.
Yes.
So currently that is a rural outlook. Like most of the people in the area, we moved into the area for the rural, the rural life that we have out here. Yes, yeah, that's my property there. And so I've been here just over 5 years. So in this time, we've had quite a bit of works going on for the development of the. So we have experienced directly what types of things that we will experience if there was an industrial area. So in the time of being there, we'd like to submit against that development of that to industrial for a number of reasons. And one of them in my submission there is being the traffic. So we have seen it increase in the volume of traffic, but also the quality of the roads that have been a result of that. So we've probably got our tyres changed a lot more often and things like that because of the quality of the roads there and the number and the amount of traffic there. And we had experienced a lot of shaking in our home. We've done some renovations and noticed the shifting from those tracks, and when they do go past, we feel the result of that. And at this stage, we understand there to be an end date to that, but this be turned into industrial. I understand that it's also going to be permanent. So, you know, we would not like that to happen. That will impact our lives greatly, actually. From not only the quality of the road, the volume, so there's quite a lot of noise across there, and of course that will increase, and not increase, but it would be more permanent. So we have made on occasion a number of complaints for noise running all hours of the night, and that has impacted not only our ability to sleep, but also a lot of horses and cows and everything in the area. So it has impacted on not only us but other creatures that live in our area. So our we have a number of dogs, and our lifestyle is around dog fostering, caring for animals, and so we have seen a negative impact on having the amount of activity, and we moved out here for that life. So negativity around this area. When things go on across the road, the horses kind of, you know, run back and forwards, and there's lots of mooing and everything going on, and I just think it's a real upset to the environment that we live in. We don't have footpaths along here. So we walk on the roadside. It's unsafe as it is now, but the increase in traffic without that around it would also cause great issue and risk to our families. And we have 3 small children here. We've got a 2-year-old, 5-year-old and 7-year-old. And, you know, I would not like the increase in that activity to impact on their safety, the safety of our animals and the safety of ourselves. We cycle to work on occasion as well. So that's also something that I'm really concerned about as a resident here. And as you know, there's a number of childcare centres, and there's also, we've established that people in this area have established a life around, there's cafes, there's a cafe down the road that has weddings outside. And so their whole livelihood has been established around these weddings outside, and a road is intended to be an industrial area. Or at the berry farm, I'm not sure if you've been there, but at the berry farm, really nice place to be. Grow beautiful strawberries there because this area is known for the good quality soil that's in there. It's known for, you can pretty much, you know, plant anything and it will grow. So it's a good place for kai. It's a place to grow kai, and I know that us as a country are losing that at a rapid pace, you know, with the loss of pukekohe and all that kind of thing as well. So I'd hate to see that be diminished by this as well. So we've recently renovated our home, and quite extensive renovations if you've been past our place. Since the road has gone in, and since all that activity has happened, there's 3 key things that we've noticed. One is the impact on the water. So I don't know if the water table has risen, but there's a lot more flooding. So we get flooded out, and so we've had to cater for that storm water work in our area around our house. So we've had to put in a lot of drains, something to do with the water table, but I've also noticed the flooding across the road in the paddocks as well. So we're a bit lower than that property over there. So if we were to have that increase in you know, development and activity and all that kind of thing, I think it's going to really take a lot of infrastructure to do this. And I know that I've just lived through, you know, 4 to 5 years of development, and they would have to do more of that. And that really impacts on our quality of life and where we're living. So we've had to put a lot more expense into the drainage than we normally would have. And I don't want to see that redone, you know, for our family and around the area. The other thing that we've noticed is the increase in rodents, like wildlife, like rats and things like that. And that has had a huge impact on us because of the disruption that's going on over there, and that will only increase if we were to have that in the industrial area. And of course, we are on water tanks, we've got trickle feed, and we don't have services. We provide our own services. Yeah, quite happily so. We lived in a rural community, so that's what we've chosen to do, the lifestyle we've chosen to have, which is fine. But all the infrastructure and things that needs to go in to do that, I think it will cause a lot more damage. I've been seeing all the, the impacts on, there's quite a big duck population out there, all the impacts on the environment in this area will be huge. It already is huge with the development of road, and I just hate to think what a development of that whole area would be. So when it comes to pollution, again, another benefit of living in a rural community is not having to put up with that light pollution, noise that comes with it. We have had a bit of that being so close to the site, and I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy machines going all day or at night times, running at night times, or workers, yelling out to each other in the middle of the night, and dogs going off and everything. And same with the light pollution as well. I think it will impact us. And our living area is to the right of our property, right out in line of sight, so I can see that whole piece of land from our living area. And I just really think it's going to negatively impact on us, our ability to entertain our whānau and our friends, our ability to live comfortably, at night time. And it doesn't matter whether it's the weekend or the weekdays, we've got children at home that we want to put to sleep and be in a quiet environment. So that will impact on us as well. The other thing that we've noticed is a lot of dust. And I'm not just talking a small amount of dust and being picky, I mean a large amount of dust that comes into our property. And so I would expect if they were to go ahead with industrial, we would get all this kind of dust and the smells and everything that comes with an industrial site. And we just didn't choose that life. And I don't believe that it is necessary for Hamilton to have another industrial area. I think we already have a large number of industrial areas, and we're getting a huge one with the port. I know I don't want to drive down the motorway and see just Hamilton, instead of this rural, beautiful Waikato rural community, just an industrial jungle. So I would love to see this area and the quiet producers and the community that it fosters to be kept the way that it is. We came in from the city, so we know what that life is, and we chose this life, as a great decision in climbing up the ladder that we wanted to do. So, yeah.
All right, look, that's, I think we understand it, and you, for someone that hasn't done this before, that was very clear. You've made your point well. Let's see if there's any questions for you from the panel, and they'll simply be to gain some clarity around some of the details that you've mentioned, if in fact there are any, because it was pretty clear. So if you just bear with us for a moment, we'll see if there's any questions for you. Let's start with you, Mr. Marg.
Thank you, Ms. Huake, for your passionate submission, but I have no questions for you.
Thank you. Ms. Gibb?
Understand all your points you made, but no questions, thank you.
So I'm sorry, I can't really hear that well.
No question. No, she said, nice presentation, no questions.
Okay.
So that's 2 down, 4 to go. Let's see how we're going. Ms. Sedgwick?
Oh, I'm going to be the same. Nice presentation. Very clear, and thank you very much for taking the time to do it, but I have no questions.
Mr. Fulton?
Thank you. Yes, you seem to be speaking on behalf of 58 other people as well who made a similar submission. So, and you have been the only one to come and speak to it. So appreciate that and congratulations on your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooney.
No, thank you. Thank you.
No, and I don't have any questions either. So you'll be able to breathe a big sigh of relief and say you've done your first hearing. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, just before we carry on with NZTA, we gave Ms. Kaur the opportunity to come back and talk to us about the NPS on urban development. So let's do that now. Thank you.
Commissioner, it might be me.
That's okay.
Can I please just ask if Mr. Cooney can just remember exactly what that question was again, so we can be sure that we're answering what he's asked.
Okay, got to remember it now.
As best as possible.
It was ages ago. He asked it ages ago. Can't remember things that far back.
Yeah. What I was saying was that the NPS is directed to promoting well-functioning urban environments to achieve capacity to meet demand, and the thrust of that national direction is to intensify development that is plan enabled and infrastructure ready, and with country living zones and with village zones, they seem to fall outside the ambit of the NPS because in most cases they're not infrastructure ready, and given the nature of their density, they're not really achieving what the NPS is seeking to achieve, that is higher densities that are plan enabled and infrastructure ready. In saying that, I acknowledge that infrastructure ready can be post zoning, but it's got to be likely, surely, to be provided. Otherwise, you don't meet the definitions of infrastructure ready in the NPS. So that's really what I'm saying, is because I think the submission we received was that the NPS is promoting this type of development, namely village zoning and country living, and I'm saying, well, I'm not sure about that. I don't believe it is. So that's the sort of debate I sort of raised.
Well, I think we would agree with you that the NPS is not promoting village or country living, and it seems the three of us have had a look at the NPS in detail following your question and the invitation for us to provide a response. But having said that I don't think limits its application. And if you look back at the application in 1.3 of the NPS, it says that this national policy statement applies to all local authorities that have all or part of an urban authority within their district or region, and planning decisions by any local authority that affect an urban environment. And in my submission, that doesn't limit the effect to those urban environments. It also has an effect on other areas that might impact on the urban environments. So it's that wider decision making regarding planning, We then had a look at the definitions, and certainly all parts of the NPS that talk about development capacity are linked, and development infrastructure are linked back to council-owned infrastructure. So that's where it's talking about for that. But it's also in those directive senses where it's talking about urban environment, it's talking about predominantly urban in character with at least 10,000 people. So we would agree with you that most of, for example, our clients that we've talked to today, none of them are in areas where there's likely to be 10,000 people. But that doesn't mean that the decisions on those might not be relevant to the NPS, because they may be decisions that affect urban capacity in terms of the urban environments. The other thing that I would suggest is that the NPS sets targets or requirements for councils to provide urban development capacity, but those are essentially minimums. The local authorities must provide this capacity, and that capacity must have either existing council-owned infrastructure or planned or ready to fund council infrastructure. But that's not saying anything about any additional capacity and how that might be planned for. On the infrastructure ready issue, I do take a bit of issue with the requirement that it's either existing for immediate, or, and it's the next two really, funded through the LTP or proposed in the LTP for the future ones. And that's where I have a real kind of
I agree with you there. It's not a straight jacket. Infrastructure can be agreed subsequent. Council could subsequently say, oh no, look, we're going to change our long-term plan. We're going to put in some new infrastructure into this area, and it can come later after the rezoning. But it's got to be a general likelihood of that happening, surely.
Well, I agree with you in principle, but we've had recently the opposite example where we've got clients got land that has been zoned industrial for years, and because there was the council wasn't aware of an imminent proposal to develop on that industrial land, it got taken out. The infrastructure got taken out of the LTP because when they counted up the numbers, they were over their borrowing limits and needed to get rid of some out of the budget. And so so where this is zoned industrial land, the LTP was changed to remove it and divert that money somewhere else. So I do think that councils have to have some flexibility in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, and I think it's probably an unhelpful link in terms of determining whether or not there's development capacity there. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, but as I said earlier, and it probably touches on your point about it's promoting minimum capacity. Leaving aside the NPS, we still have the jurisdiction to consider each proposal on its merits and in terms of the strategic planning documents.
Well, going further than that, in light of colonial vineyards, you have the obligation to consider those in my submission.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Forrett.
Thank you.
That now brings us to Mr. Wood from NZTA, please.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, hello. Mike Wood from Wakatahi, Principal Planner. So the panel's happy. I don't propose reading through my summary statement. It is quite extensive, given that we've submitted across a number of geographical areas.
Yes.
I have reviewed the legal submissions, council's concluding comments on topics that have been heard, and heard most of the hearing recordings, and I guess a couple of points just to add. In terms of Kima Hea Lakes, we're now satisfied that all our issues have been addressed. In relation to everything else, my position remains unchanged in relation to the points made in my evidence in chief and summary statement. So I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wood. That was A+ for brevity.
Yep.
And succinctness. But we have read your evidence and we have read your summary statement. So thank you for that. Let's see if there are any questions, though. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gibb?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
I have no questions, but your report made interesting reading, so thank you. And thank you for your brevity as well.
Okay.
Mr. Mark?
Yeah, just one on 10.3. Can you just describe to me what you mean by the site doesn't have a clear defensible boundary?
So I think the point I was making, and I think I picked it up through the framework report around Lens 3, I think, good planning practice from memory, about having a hard boundary. So at the moment, for Hamilton to the east, it is the expressway forms that boundary. So that's the kind of defensible boundary. Another example could be a rail line, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you very much. No other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kearney?
No, thanks.
No, and I don't have any questions either. Thanks, Mr. Wood. It's all pretty clear cut in terms of what you're seeking and why. So thank you very much. Sorry that you probably had to sit there for quite a long time, and must have been exhilarating going through all the recordings of our hearings.
Well, I was able to fast forward to the key ones, but yeah, it was
Good
interesting.
answer.
Thank you.
Good answer. All right, thanks for your time.
So yeah.
You'd be watching the cricket, would you? Sure. Soon.
What time's that start? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
All right, but we've still got time in hand. I see Mr. Rob is here. So, Mr. Rob, I think we're ready to hear from you now too. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Jacob Robb. Beside me is David and Barbara Zendorn, submitter 292.
Thank you.
So the evidence that's been submitted to date, I submitted evidence myself with supporting information in response to the Section 42A report. I would like to take my evidence submitted to date as read, including my highlights package. And
that's fine. Thank you.
Cool. Submissions 292 and 0.4 and 292.6 relate to 1002, which is the smaller property highlighted in the rural zone, just in the centre. Yeah, just to the left of the cursor there. That's the one. And 292.6 relates to the larger property that spreads around the outside. Firstly, regarding submission 292.4 and the smaller property, given the small developed nature of the site at the eastern edge of a line of residential sites that are already proposed to be zoned residential, I consider the conversion of this land from rural to residential will be logical and consistent with the established pattern of development in the area. I note that the council planner has recommended to accept this submission point, and both the Regional Council and Hamilton City Council have acknowledged the existing characteristics of the site and removed their opposition regarding this particular submission point. As a result, I'd like to focus the rest of this on submission point 292.6 and the wider site.
It's fine, thank you.
I believe it's important to consider the context of the site. Firstly, from a high-level strategic perspective, in that the land has been identified by the future-proof strategy, both in the 2009 mapping and in the 2017 mapping. As a result, it is identified, also identified by the Waikato Regional Policy Statements Map 6C. The land is hence located within an identified growth area and is consistent with the general direction of growth as anticipated in the region. In addition to this, as visible in Appendix A to my highlights package and in the image on the screen at the moment, it is located around existing urban development in the Gordonton Township, where it not only borders the urban land, but also provides a connection between several clusters, if you will, of residential sites directly to the south and to the southeast. Furthermore, the site is clearly defined and distinguished from the rural land to the north by the Komakura stream, like much of the existing Gordonton Township. As a result, not only can the site be easily assimilated into the Gordonton settlement, but the stream to the north provides a distinct and logical boundary that defines the urban fringe and separates the site from the wider rural environment. Furthermore, it provides a logical barrier which prevents further urban expansion to the north. Regarding this piece of land, I believe it's also important to consider the existing characteristics and constraints of the site. Most notable for the Gordonton community is the lack of council-owned infrastructure. In light of this, Blue Wallace has prepared a high-level 3 waters assessment in support of the submission, which demonstrates that despite the lack of council-owned infrastructure, residential land use options and development options are available through on-site management systems in a manner that's consistent with the existing Gordonton Township. I want to note as well that the large yellow property at 16 Garfield Street, just to the northwest of the site, has recently been rezoned as part of this proposed plan change and is subject to the same 3 waters constraints as the site. In addition to 3 waters, there is topography and potential flood risk on site. This has also been acknowledged through the 3 waters assessment that was provided and the scheme plan that was also provided, where it's been demonstrated that residential development is possible on the elevated portions of the land, which can sufficiently accommodate residential development outside of these hazard risks. And this is obviously subject to additional reporting that would assist in any subdivision application in the future. I believe it's also important to, sorry, bear with me while I find. It's important to consider the existing land use of the site, which is currently rural, and the appropriateness of this. In particular, the size of the site is 2.5 hectares at the moment and is irregularly shaped. So it's currently inappropriate for productive rural land uses. Furthermore, even the building standards of the rural zone restrict what can be built on the site, namely 25-metre setbacks from the boundaries of the site. I note that there's currently no dwelling on the site at the current time. Furthermore, the fact that the site is separated from the rural land to the north by the stream distinguishes it from other rural properties in the vicinity, in that it would be difficult to combine with other rural sites to create a productive rural site, because you'd have to either take stock through the stream or over the stream. Before I give David and Barbara the opportunity to speak, I just wanted to touch on as well, there are obvious benefits in the potential redevelopment of this site. As it currently stands, stock can occupy the full site. Converting it to residential land would then remove stock from the stream banks, thus providing ecological benefits. There's also the opportunity for planting, pocket parks, and more connectedness with the stream through esplanade reserves, which both David and Barbara are willing to engage in discussions with council on that matter. I have touched on the opposing further submissions that were received, but I'd like to take those as read as well, just to keep things moving at this stage.
Thank you.
Overall, in my view, not only is the existing land use inappropriate, but the conversion of the land to residential would provide a continuation of the existing urban form and would provide the township with a clear and obvious boundary. Furthermore, I think it's been adequately demonstrated that the existing characteristics and constraints of the site have been considered, and development can be suitably provided. Thank you. I'll pass it over to David and Barbara if they have anything to share.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Just by way of, that's the green area. Am I right in thinking that's the Gordonton Hall? Have I got the location right?
No, that's more the school and the
Well, it's just past the Gordonton Hall, but that's where you are. Is that right?
Yeah, that's all council reserve land. I think there's a kohanga.
Yeah, I know where it is. I just wanted to be clear that I was on the right location, but I know exactly where you're talking about. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So Jacob has asked us to share some more information about what we've been doing. So, and just to explain how we use the property at the moment. So just as an intro, we came there 3 years ago, and we hadn't had any background or experience in farming or livestock, so it was all new to us. But we bought the property as a lifestyle block. So we've done quite a bit. We've planted a lot of hedging type plants, 200 to 300, I would say. We bought some handful of cows and sheep, but we quickly learned we needed to put up a barrier fencing. Otherwise, those trees just got quickly demolished and destroyed. We've found it's taken like quite a lot of time to do various things. And you know, you sort of do a bit here, a bit there. You're trying to get things done in between all the other things that you do in life. We've focused on improving the property with just some simple and cost-effective type stuff. We haven't gone all out doing anything major, and that's been our focus rather than the cost of what we were doing. We wanted to make the improvements to the place. So we've learned over that time, about 3 years, we've learned a lot about animal care, just through our own hands-on work and through the advice that friends have given us. And that's been fun for us. And that was kind of our objective. So it's not profitable, but I would say that it's worth the fun. And, you know, the costs keep mounting up. There's virtually no revenue at all. When I worked at Inland Revenue about 20 years ago, when I was like sort of starting out in a career, there was the term that I heard kind of bandied around sometimes, was a hobby farm, and meaning that it falls outside the income tax system just because of its nature. And really, I mean, now that I'm sort of doing this, it's quite obvious why that would be. A while back, one time a friend of mine, he told me that 2 acres, even though we've got about 6 acres, is as much work as 200 acres. So for him, you know, it just wasn't a viable type of thing. And I realise he's right in saying that. So basically, you have to have a passion for just being there and doing everything. Otherwise, it just really does drive you crazy. I was going to mention, we now have to fence. We're finding we have to fence the boundary. It's about 450 metres, or up to that amount, because there's 2 parts, 2 sides, left and right, and 450 metres of the Kormakaro stream, because the animals of their own free will are jumping to the other side. So, you know, we've got really no other option apart from getting rid of them all. And I would say that I've got a patient and long-suffering wife who would prefer to have the quiet life, I think. But instead, she puts up and goes along well with all my mad ideas and activity. When we first did this, it was not our intention. When we first moved to Gordonton, it was not our intention to do any sort of mass house building or subdivision. We simply planned to build a new house. So we engaged a building company to do some initial work and soil tests. But at that time, the proposed district plan was being done. And we discovered 2 things. First of all, that there was an oversight whereby any residential activity in a rural zone, such as just putting on one house onto a big lot even, was treated as non-complying. Secondly, that the mixed, we already for 1012 Gordonton Road, the bigger of the 2 properties, under the operative district plan, there was already a mixed residential / rural zoning for that property. But under the proposed district plan, that was proposed to change to solely to becoming, and thank you for showing that plan too, by the way. So that was proposed to becoming all rural. And we felt that that was going to disadvantage us from, and we would lose something from having a living zone classification. So hence, we took the time and submitted. I mean, it's something I've never done before, but it's been good experience. To taking the time to submit to the PDP.
I think we've got the message, Mr. Zendorn. We understand the background, we understand your motivation, and we understand what it is you're wanting. Yes. So I think we're ready just to see if there's any questions of clarification, unless there's anything else you want to say just before you conclude.
No. Okay. No, that's good. Thank you for that, Barbara. It's
very, very good. Thank you. Let's start with you, Mr. Kearney.
No, thank you. I think it's pretty clear.
Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me, but thank you very much.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
That was very clear, and thank you very much for taking the time to present. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb?
Not from me, but I think Mrs. Zendorn may have wanted to comment. Is that correct?
Oh, thank you. It's not much. It's just to say that that the land's there. It's not really been properly utilised anyway. And I think for the community, for the businesses there, and there's an opportunity for some more families to have a place in there.
Okay, thank you. It was very clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all very much. That is clear. And we'll have to take all of that on board when we make our final decisions. Thanks for sharing your information with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which brings us to 3:15, which is afternoon tea time. I think we've been going a wee while this afternoon, so I think it's probably a good opportunity to take a break. So we'll adjourn until 3:30. If you're intending to stay on the call after the break, please don't log off, just turn your sound off and your video. Thank you. And we'll see you back at 3:30. Just waiting for Ms. Oh no, there she is. All right, thanks everybody. We're ready to resume. And Hamilton City Council, please, Ms. Gold.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Right. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Hopefully it all works.
We'll find out.
Can you all see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Apologies, the button that worked last time did not work this time. So those are the topics I want to briefly discover. For the most part, I haven't, it's all been in the slides that you've already received, so I will just touch on the areas.
All right, thank you.
That I need to. Right. So Ruakura, I feel like it's all fairly self-explanatory in the text there. We've sort of changed our opinion as things have moved forward, but we're cognizant of the issues that the Section 42A author has raised and that they need to be addressed before any further rezoning happens on this land. But we are also fully supportive of the investigation and work that's happening through the Metro Spatial Plan, and this area is a priority development area. Same goes for the Puketaha area, where support the Section 42A author's recommendations for those.
Thank you.
Tamahiri, HEC still opposed any further rezoning of the rural to a country living zone at Martinga Road and New Melody Lane. Ms. Tate in her rebuttal had changed her recommendation to support the rezoning to country living because the land is in it as a discrete landlocked block by the expressway. And because the strategic agreement in 2020 has specifically excluded Tamahiri as a potential future transfer area. HCC's opposition still remains the same in that the cross-boundary impacts on Hamilton City, such as the infrastructure, are not addressed by rezoning this land. I also supported in my evidence for the framework report, which identified other issues such as land fragmentation and the expectation versus reality. In my mind, the issue of land fragmentation still remains regardless of which council's jurisdiction the Tamahiri block is in. Furthermore, I don't believe the expansion of the country living zone meets the principles sought by the NPSUD, the RPS, or future-proof, which all seek a well-planned, well-functioning and integrated urban environment, which includes integration with Hamilton. I just want to completely change here and just discuss the urban expansion area. There are still 3 areas subject to the urban expansion area, which are H21, R2 and WA, which you can see on the map there. And HCC supports the 42A recommendations not to rezone any rural land to an urban zone within the UEA. And just to note that, and it's come up with several submitters, that the UEA zoning or overlay can't just be applied to land on our boundary because it seems like a good idea. It's part of the strategic agreement and it needs to be agreed between Waikato and Hamilton City. Just in respect of the Gauze submission, which you heard from yesterday, and I listened in on that. So we understand the submitter's frustration, and it's a long time frame for their land to be developed. However, HCC still seeks to maintain the land until a comprehensive planning exercise is undertaken. Once the land becomes part of Hamilton, and allowing country living zone in the interim is not appropriate, and the submitters referred to areas in Rototuna that they saw as country living zone or large lot residential, and they were eventually retrofitted to an urban density. They didn't know or express the issues that Hamilton City had in actually being able to achieve that. It was quite problematic. And I addressed this issue in my evidence to the country living zone last year, including an example of where this happened. And it's also a note that several of the Section 42A authors have identified that it's problematic to use large lot zones as a transitional zone. Gordington, again, it's self-explanatory. We've got no particular objection to the rezoning of the smaller lot on Gordington Road, as it reflects the status quo. And at present, with the lack of evidence that we'd seen, we support the 42A's recommendation that the rural zones remains for the larger lot. But in general, we wouldn't have any major objection given the distance from Hamilton City if it was in your mind to change the zoning to residential. Just on the country living zone as well, we've just heard from Horatu Properties. HE still opposes a rezoning in this area given the proximity to Hamilton. And just one other point of clarification, both Ms. Morse and Dr. Farrett both referred to the land as not being within the area of interest and referred to a gazetted map. I just want to clarify the area of interest that they referred to in my evidence was part of that mapped area of interest in our original submission. So I'm not quite sure how it does. They don't believe it falls in that. And with that, that's all, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gold. Let's see if there are any questions. Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
Sorry, I lost my mute button. No, there are no questions from me.
Ms. Gibb?
Just one question, thanks, Ms. Gulch, regarding Horatu Properties and across the road, which is closer to the expressway, which is closer to where Hamilton City Council's strategic agreement is, there is already country living zone. So I don't actually know how that came about, but that is already there. So I was wondering why you would think that the Horatu property submission might compromise it further, since already in that area there's country living zone.
Yeah, and I understand that country living zone is historic and it's run up the edge of, right up the edge of that HT1 area. Hamilton City, our preference would be that it wasn't even an HT1. We would prefer that it wasn't a thing and we were dealing with rural zone only. For us, it's just that continual creep of country living. It goes further and further up the river. So it's that ribbon development that just keeps going. And we prefer that it was stopped where it was.
But given that there are no plans immediately to take over, is it HT1 or R2? Which one is it?
HT1's the top of the city, yes.
There's no immediate plans, and I imagine it's a huge amount, it's a huge area, HT1. Why in the very near future, or if even in the next probably 30 years, I cannot imagine Hamilton City wanting that bit across the expressway when there's so much land in HT1 already that would need to be looked at. So yeah, I'm just thinking of all the pros and cons to the argument. So yeah, you don't know of any near plans to take over HT1?
I understand that that's still some time away to take that land on. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thanks very much, Ms. Gold.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
Yes, no, I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've lost track of who I haven't asked. Have I asked you, Mr. Marg?
Yes, you have.
Yeah, I thought I started with you. Mr. Cooney then, please.
Yes, Ms. Gold, when's Waikato, when's Hamilton going to promote? It's the UAE agreement, isn't it? Is that it?
Strategic agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When's it going to bring all that land into the city?
I don't have a clear time frame for you, sorry. It's trigger based now opposed to set dates. And that's a discussion between Hamilton City and Waikato District at a governance level to kick that off.
Do you think, as a planner, it's reasonable to actually, through an agreement between two local authorities, with, I assume, not much input from the landowners, to put a freeze on the redevelopment or rezoning of land without some sort of finite date put on it?
And again, the triggers versus the dates, that was something that was agreed through that strategic agreement. So
I'm surprised that landowners haven't really tackled the politicians at both councils about this.
I have no insight to those discussions they possibly have. I have no idea.
Yeah.
They definitely have. They definitely have. And Commissioner Cooney, I was talking about the same thing, and it's probably because we've talked about things like HT1 for quite some time, but HT1 is in the strategic agreement. So we're talking about the same thing, I think.
Okay.
But they definitely have given us quite an earful, probably lots of politicians on both sides of the fence, and it's all about planning and when it can happen, and it costs a lot of money to put, that's the problem. It all boils down to, where does the money come from?
Do you think you should have not put the agreement in place until you'd worked out, when are we going to bring this land in and how are we going to finance it?
A question for Ms. Gibb or Ms. Gold?
Predates my time. Maybe Mr. Fulton can explain.
Yeah, I think we're getting off the point a bit, and you're probably getting but it just from a planning perspective, it doesn't seem to me to stack up as being the sort of right approach for some reason. I've got to put my finger on it, but I have a bit of sympathy for landowners who have been subject to this for years, and their land is effectively frozen.
Yeah, and I accept that that is a frustration for those landowners. But again, the timing of this, our aim is through the planning documents is to enable when we actually receive when that land is transferred, for us to be able to develop it comprehensively and not have to work around all these little bits and pieces that have occurred in the interim. But yes, I do accept that there's frustrations from the landowners.
Yeah.
I do know that the Hamilton City is currently progressing our Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy and revisiting that to look at the outer sequence and future development areas. So there may be something that comes from that.
Okay, yeah, yeah, well, I won't go into it further, but it's a situation where it seems to me you got, well, let's do another planning document, let's go and do another study, let's go and meanwhile the landowners are just sitting there and thinking, well, when's this going to reach some end point?
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
unfortunately,
thank you.
I don't have any answers for you on that.
No, it's a bit unfair asking you these questions, but anyhow, it's yeah, I do share the landowners' frustration.
Thanks, Mr. Cooney. Yeah, I'd just be going down the same path, so I won't bother. But appreciate your conciseness and the focus of your submission, Ms. Goblin. Your evidence has been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brings us to our last submitter for the day, which is Ohiniwai Lands Limited. Thank you.
And excuse me, Mr. Chair, but I'll excuse myself from this part of the hearing.
All right, thank you. We'll have a conversation at the end of today, though, so if you're still around, that would be good. Right.
Good afternoon to the panel. Ms. Parkinson appearing for Ohiniwai Lands Limited.
Thank you.
I do apologise, I was attempting with this remote to try and zoom us in so that we weren't quite so distant, but it's not cooperating, so.
No, that's okay.
So I have filed written submissions. I don't intend to go through those. And this morning I put in just my synopsis of oral submissions. The legal submissions and the highlights package were filed prior to the release of the panel's decision on the Ohiniwai rezoning. And there are three issues or two issues that have come out of the rezoning decision that I wish to address today, and also to provide a response to the Section 42A author's opening statement.
That's fine, thank you.
So the first point is a revision to OLL's fuzz relief to reduce the area of fuzz sought for future industrial land, and we've called this the Northern Block in legal submissions and evidence. So OLL is seeking a fuzz over properties to the north and the south of the Ambury site. That's in paragraph 2 of my written submissions, and I see Mr. Fletcher has helpfully brought up the attachment 2 to Mr. Tooze's evidence. This is an amended version, and it shows at the bottom the southern block, which totals 39 hectares and is intended to be future residential, and the northern block, which is the rectangular block, which is a reduced future industrial fuzz. And I will leave it to Mr. Tooze to just talk you through the boundaries of that fuzz and how that will connect in a more logical way with the APL industrial block than the original relief, which continued over all of OLL's land, so went up to the north of the Lemy Road. Now, at paragraph 11 of my written submissions, I acknowledged that the fate of OLL's submission was contingent on the panel's decision on the Ambury property submission seeking rezoning. Now that the panel has decided to accept APL's rezoning request, the question of the most appropriate zoning for the OLL land remains to be addressed. The opening statement of the section 42A reporting officer, paragraph 22, concludes that the residential fuzz for the southern block is logical, but continues to have concerns about the industrial fuzz for the northern block. And part of that concern is not knowing what the intention is for that land, which I would submit is clear from OLL's evidence. The intention is to follow a first schedule process at some point in the future to rezone the land for industrial uses. And I submit that the amended northern fuzz is a logical extension to the Ohaniwai industrial precinct. The western and southern boundaries of the amended fuzz immediately adjoin the Ohaniwai industrial precinct. The northern boundary adjoins the Lemy Road and so would be serviced by that road. I will note that that's a paper road for some of its length, but it's certainly there and available to be developed. And the eastern boundary is aligned with the boundaries of the Ohaniwai structure plan. I refer to paragraph 12 of my written submission and submit the evidence before the panel, which includes the evidence that was presented at hearing 19, demonstrates that the fuzz for the northern block is appropriate to ensure sufficient industrial land supply in conjunction with the APL industrial land. And I'm instructed in that respect that Ohaniwai have continued their discussions with APL and how their intentions for that land could be integrated with APL's plans for the structure plan area. And the two blocks will provide for the residential and business growth anticipated in Waikato 2070. Also, I'd like to just refer the panel back to Mr. Tu's evidence in chief and paragraphs 54, 58 and 59, which relate to the NPS UD and the consistency of these two areas of fuzz with policy 8 and policy 1. Jurisdiction to amend the Ohaniwai structure plan. This is not an issue that has been raised, but it's one that's anticipated could arise. When the panel released its decision on the Ohaniwai structure plan, at paragraph 19 of that decision, the panel noted its initial intention was to address all submissions which address zoning at Ohaniwai. However, on further consideration, the panel resolved to incorporate decisions on other submissions into hearing 25. Those submissions included OLL's submission seeking amendments to the Ohaniwai structure plan. I'm fairly confident that the decision doesn't deal with those changes, and I'd refer in respect of those changes to the legal submissions. If I can just give you a reference to those. These are the legal submissions for hearing 19 dated 8 September 2020. They were filed by Greenwood Roach, and at paragraph 2.7b, it sets out the changes to the structure plan that was sought, and Mr. Toos can take you through those in just a little bit more detail. I submit that the panel retains the jurisdiction to direct amendments to the decision version of the Ohaniwai structure plan. Submissions on the proposed Waikato district plan are the source of the panel's jurisdiction, and until a decision is made on a submission, the panel is not functus officio as to the subject matter of the submission. I've referred the panel to a recent High Court decision, Potamu Charitable Trust and Taranaki Regional Council, which summarises general principles for when a decision maker is functus officio. I won't read through those principles. They're set out in my synopsis, but in my submission, the panel isn't functus officio with respect to the relief that OLL has sought in hearing 19 to make changes to the structure plan, Ohaniwai structure plan. And that's basically all the points that I wanted to make. If there are any questions from the panel, or if you want to reserve your questions and put them to both myself and Mr. Toombs again.
I think the latter's that's what we've been doing today. So I think we'll continue on that basis. So we're ready to hear from you, Mr. Toombs, and we'll see if there's any questions of either of you when you're finished.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Look, I'll use my summary statement of evidence as a sort of a baseline. I won't read through it verbatim since everything is pre-read. And in any case, there was of its time, and there's obviously components of it have now been replaced since the hearings 19 decision has been released. So in summary, my overall evidence sort of fell into two parts around the Ohaniwai land, and that was essentially comes down to the question of should this land be urbanised, and if the answer to that was yes, all of that being contingent on the APL decision on the APL land, then the second component was the how. In the question of the should, in my evidence, I tracked through the higher order documents, the Waikato RPS, and then also through the strategic documents that are relevant, those under the produced by councils under the LGA, and most recently the District Council's Waikato 2070 document. A lot of that has been obviously well traversed in the recent hearings 19 decision. So I didn't want to, or didn't feel the need to actually go back over those in any great depth, but just emphasise again that OOL are not seeking a live zoning. It is a future urban zone. So it is the intent for future urbanisation. And for me, looking at the future urban zone provisions which have been put forward and by staff, I support those. I think they establish a sound process, but they obviously will not provide the full picture for the content and detail of those future sites, which will be obviously covered at the stage of a live zoning. I think one of the only final thing I'd say on that first part is consequential to the hearings 19 decision. If the panel is moved to introduce a future urban zone for the two land blocks that OOL have identified, then from my perspective, it's probably fairly straightforward to include those as additional identifications with the new special purpose zone that's specific to Ohaniwai, rather than elsewhere in the proposed plan. So the second part of my evidence was around the how of the two land blocks, and the first block, which is south of Tahuna Road, it's of 36 hectares, is a residential, proposed for residential, and again reflecting the alignment with the APL structure derived structure plan, considerable work was put in by OL to integrate and ensure that there was a functioning urban environment, literally on both sides of the road. And then the same sort of considerations as for the APL block also came into train. Both are next to significant ecological or areas with ecological interests, lakes and the like. And so a considerable component of the land block on that residential block is set aside for open space to the order of 13 hectares. Sorry, correction, 16 hectares, leaving 23 hectares for residential development. Now, the second block, which Ms. Parkinson alluded to, was the northern block, which is industrial. And I think it's fair to say, for myself, having joined this process earlier in the year, OL's thinking has tracked and aligned with APL, and I think where they've come to as a landing point seems logical and rational in terms of a future urban zone over that area. Essentially, the area identified by OL for a future urban zone basically takes up the residual or last area that is allotted in the 2070 document for Hinawai for industrial land in the planning period, the 1 to 10 year planning period. And although of course it's the Waikato 2070 is a strategy, there is a reasonable degree of certainty with the use of Boltons Road as a divider line between that industrial area, the south being the one that I've mentioned, the 1 to 10 year, and then the 10 to 30 year period, which is the bubble in the 2070 document north of Boltons. And from my perspective, that's a discussion for another time, when and if that land becomes rezoned for future urban or alive zoning. But I think south of Boltons Road, given that the residual block that OLL are seeking, it's contiguous with the APL land. Forethought's been put into linkages, most particularly the continuance of or potential for continuance of the rail track access, and I think it for the purpose of the proposed Waikato district plan for Hinawai, it completes the picture for the planning period, the 10-year planning period for industry. Now, probably my final point here is, and this comes back to the comment in the staff, the officer's report around support for residential, but not for the industrial area. I think all I can say in response to that is I understand where the reporting officer is coming from, because for the Hinawai South block, the residential block south of Tahuna Road, you've got a section 32AA planning report with optimistical urban design report, and an indicative infrastructure reporting and an archaeological assessment. And none of those are there for that northern block. I think in these circumstances, it's a case of simply stepping back and looking at the purpose of the future urban zone. It's the entry point for that zone is the strategic decisions that are either above the plan in terms of the RPS, or in this case in their own council strategic Waikato 2070 document. And we, I use the we because Harrison Gresham prepared the section 32AA report for the South Block. That's partway along towards a structure plan, which would be required for a live zoning. So I don't see an equivalent level of reporting necessary for the panel to make a decision on that northern industrial block. But that's the summation of my evidence, and I think, as you say, we're happy for both of us to take questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Let's start with you, Mr. Fulton, please.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No, none from me either.
Ms. Gibb?
Nothing from me either. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
Just can you remind me of the documents you filed in support of the land to the south? You had a was it a Becker or Buffer-Miskel report? That was on what?
Yes, that's correct. So that is it's quite a lengthy document. It's attached to my primary submission 428.
Yeah, and what did that address? Did it address what, ecology or what?
At a high level, yes, it did. But there were three components. So Buffer-Miskel did an urban design report. They acknowledged, but they didn't touch on the technical expertise around ecology itself. So it was a high level report.
Yeah, and what were the other reports?
The second was an infrastructure report, which again was prepared by Harrison Grierson, and that was focused in on free water infrastructure provision. And again, it was of its time, being prior to the Hearing 19 proceedings. And then the third and final one was archaeological.
Okay. I suppose what I'm coming to is, has there been any cumulative effects assessment done if we take the Ohiniwai APL development and it's developed to its fullest extent, and then you guys come along and you say, well, we want to have part of this and we want to develop across the road. So what I'm saying is, well, what would be anticipated cumulative effects of doing that? You got things like the transport network, the impact on the expressway. You've got the interlink between the various roads. You've got stormwater issues. You've got the floodway issues with the Waikato floodplain. You've got all those issues. So what studies have been done to address those issues to give us a bit of a perspective on well, is it appropriate even to zone at this point in time this land future urban?
At this stage, those assessments have not been undertaken, but I think they fall into two parts. Those that are clearly external to the site itself, and Commissioner Cooney, of note would be transport. Other ones probably more locational specific, such as addressing stormwater, which I think would have a site, more of a site specific response. I think though the question really here though is, staff have put forward a future urban zone as a way of addressing the requirements in the new NPS UD, and we're familiar all with policy 8 and the need for competitive margin and the like. So identification as a future urban zone, as I understand the provisions have been put forward by staff, they don't give an automatic passport to full urbanisation of those land blocks. It is simply identification, and then the work needs to then be done, because I think if we were to raise the entry threshold to the point where parties needed to undertake quite extensive technical reporting, you're well on the way to a private plan change for a live zoning. So I think that's probably the question that the panel will need to, I guess, consider, because certainly it's been acknowledged in the Section 42A report for future urban zoning is that it's appropriate as a process interim to protect land for future urbanisation, but not necessarily having a complete picture or full answers around all the matters that you identified, Commissioner.
Yeah, I can understand that where you've got general patterns of development occurring, but here this was quite a unique situation that has occurred, and so it highlights the importance of getting it right, because it's come out as an unplanned development. So what do you want to say about that?
Well, yes, no, I fully accept what you're saying. So if OLL were proposing as almost like a spot zone, their two pieces of land, or a piece of land without APL, then it's not a realistic proposition. And that for a call, I outlined that in my evidence at the outset, is that the evidence stood in, for the decision to be made on urbanisation, it had to await it is consequent on a decision around APL. With that APL decision now having been made, then I do think that the OLL land is appropriate, because you've got two contiguous land areas which are, or can be, quite tightly knitted into a future OLL Ohinawai centre, and also probably utilise the land in quite an efficient way. I think in my primary evidence about paragraph 59, I guess alluded to situations where, when you're creating a new centre, literally out of, well, grass paddocks, there's actually often advantages to having a group of landowners or developers working under the formality of a structure plan, with clear regulatory guidance from the council. I think there are benefits actually to having these two sites brought in as future, but certainly we're not, I guess, how do I put it? We're not locking down or anticipating the detail that will then have to follow, in my view, more properly with the live zoning, as to how these two blocks, will be, the extent to which they will be zoned for residential or industrial, as the case may be.
Yep. Okay. I suppose cumulative effects can be further looked at the time you want to apply for a live zoning. That could be the crunch point at that point, as to, well, does this reach a tipping point? Okay, I don't think I've got any more questions, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
If I may just quickly address that point about when it's appropriate to address cumulative effects. Yes. I would suggest that on the case law, there needs to be some certainty around the intensity of the use of these future urban areas. So, for example, how many dwellings would be accommodated in the southern block for residential, and then a consideration of the effects of that intensity or density along with the APL proposal, which would be further along by the time we're considering live zoning. So I'd submit that cumulative effects are better addressed at the live zoning stage rather than the future urban zone stage.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the submitters that we're going to hear. As per normal practice, we'll invite both Section 42A report authors to provide a succinct reply, what we've called a reply statement, which is simply to record any changes of opinion that they may have had after having heard the evidence and the questioning and the answers and so forth during the hearing. We haven't got a fixed time frame for that, but if the two authors could liaise perhaps with Ms. Ratt during the course of the next day or two, so that next time the panel chats, we'll have a bit of a heads up on what that timing might be. But it's not necessary to beat yourselves up doing it, you know, yesterday or tomorrow sort of thing. So on that basis, thank you everybody for your contribution to this hearing. Thank you to the submitters that have taken the time to come and talk to us. So we'll now adjourn, but if the panel could hold fire for a little while.